Hello, welcome, good evening. Looks like my camera's a little low, let me fix that. What is Shakespeare for, if not to prop up cameras? There we go. All right. Hey, y'all. Tabitha Eisner here. I'm going to talk a little bit about gerrymandering tonight. So we're going to start by talking about what is gerrymandering and why it's a problem and something that you should be paying attention to. Then we're going to talk about kind of the history and challenges and what makes it kind of a difficult problem to fix. And then we'll talk about some potential remedies, solutions to the problem. Solution is probably optimistic, but at least what we can do about it. So go ahead and jump in. Let's see if we've got folks who are with us. All right, looks like we've got several folks here. Wonderful. Please leave your comments in, ask your questions, add commentary there in the comments section, and I will get to questions along the way as much as I can. Okay, so gerrymandering. I love a whiteboard, so y'all thank you for tolerating me using the whiteboard a lot. So gerrymandering is when it's all about redistricting. So every 10 years we do a census. Why do we do a census? We do a census because we want to know how many people there are in this country, and we want to make sure that they're all equally represented. So we have a law that says that every 10 years we do a census. It's in the Constitution. And we don't do the census, so the results of the census get used for lots of things, right? Like figuring out how much money each of the states is going to get for various projects and things. It's often based on how many people live in that state or in that particular area within a state. But also, we use the total population numbers to decide how many congressional seats each state gets. So in the state of Circle, we've got like 2 senators. Oh, so that's so hard to see up there, but anyway, bear with me. So in the state of Circle, there are 2 senators, right? Every state gets 2 senators. This should just be Alabama, but I don't want to draw it because y'all would critique me probably. You get 2 senators, and if everybody in the state of Circle, like on average, right, we get like, let's say, for example, 60% Republican, then the senator is likely to be a Republican. And the census, the number of people in the state, doesn't change how many senators we get, right? We get 2 senators no matter what. I'm getting to the good stuff, so apologies for a slow start. So we would get 2 senators. Our 2 senators would almost certainly be Republican, chances are. But the circle then gets divided up into districts for the sake of electing House of Representatives people. So we might divide in any number of funny ways to create our congressional districts. Congressional districts, there are 435 congressional districts in this country. It used to vary. The number of congressional districts we had would go up, would go down. Now it stays solid at 435 because Congress passed a law a while back about that. And so what that means is that it used to be that there were only like 100,000 people per House district. And now there are like 700,000 people per House district. So this is supposed to be the House of the people, right? But like one person is representing 700,000 people. So in every state, we cut the state into groups of 700,000 people. more or less, and those become congressional districts. So although in a 60% Republican state, you might end up with 2 Republican senators, in theory, in a 60% Republican state, if you have 5 congressional districts, three should be Republican and 2 should be Democrat, right? Because that's 60% of the seats going to Republicans and 40% to Democrats. But you'll notice that in Alabama, this is exactly how it works, right? We're 60% Republican, 40% Democrat, and yet Democrats don't get 40% of the congressional seats. We have 7 districts in Alabama, and Democrats get 1. 6 Republican districts and 1 Democratic district. So instead of Democrats getting 40% of the seats, congressional seats in Alabama, we get, I think that's 17%. That's so wrong. We should be getting more seats than that. So then take it down to the state legislative level, and the same thing is happening, where again, 60% of the state is Republican, sure, but shouldn't we then, as Democrats, have 40% of the state rep seats? When you divide it into smaller chunks, more people get to win, and 40% of the seats should go to Republicans, but they don't. So when the census happens every 10 years, we find out new numbers of people. We have to cut the state into the appropriate number of districts, and they have to be evenly sized. And it is the state legislature that does that does the redistricting. And gerrymandering is when the whoever's the decision maker in the state draws these lines not based on what's good for the voters, but based on what's good for the politicians. Now, I'm a politician. I ran for office. I don't think that I should get to choose my voters. I think the voters should choose or not choose me. That's how democracy is supposed to work. Unfortunately, we've gotten to this place where the politicians are choosing their voters rather than the voters choosing their politicians. So let me dig in a little bit more on that. That is not erasing well. So as you saw on the event listing, so the picture for this Facebook event showed this great graphic, right, of dividing people up into red and blue. I don't think I can draw it fast enough, but let's say, so again in our circle, I'll leave my circle here. So the circle is stripes of red and blue. It's not really in stripes, but stay with me. And there's more red in our state, unfortunately, than blue right now. But there is blue. So here's our mixed state, 60% red, 40% blue. If we divided up, let's pretend we're the legislatures who get to decide on these districts. If we made this a district, oh, that black doesn't look at all. If we made that a district, that is in a red district, right? Pretty much 100% red. Let's just make the districts based on where the stripes are. So you end up with 4 red districts and 3 blue districts, because it's majority Republican, but not entirely Republican. So of the 7 districts, we'd get 4 Republican 3 Democrat. But if instead of doing it this way, if you instead cut the districts this way, and you got a mix in every district, then every district would be 60% Republican and 40% Democrat, and we could hypothetically lose all 7 districts, which would suck, to be clear. So how you cut those lines makes all the difference. And we know, right, that like Democrats cluster together in cities, and Republicans tend to be in a higher percentage in rural areas. So we would expect to see, if there's a district that's just made up of a city, it's probably going to be a Republican district, a Democratic district, and a district that's more rural might be more Republican. So what you see happening is that these decisions are made very strategically, and the party that's in charge can manipulate the drawing of the lines to make sure that they win. So 2 key things to understand about how that's done. So there's this term called packing. So packing is when you pack as many people of a certain kind, say Black people, into a single district. You pack all the Black folks into one district, and then that district votes for a Democrat. Yay! But they vote for a Democrat overwhelmingly, like say Terry Sewell, who gets 97% of the vote, because her district is so overwhelmingly Black and Democrat. That's great on the one hand for her, she gets a great seat, but what it means is that there are fewer Democrats and fewer Black folks to be in other districts. So by packing them all into one district, the Republicans ensure that there won't be as many Black folks, Democrats, in other districts. And so that's what the Republicans did in our state. They packed all the Democrats, as many Black folks as they could possibly pack, into Congressional District 7, Terry Sewell's district. And that meant that there weren't very many Black folks, Democrats, in any of the other 6 districts. So packing, that's when you put your enemy into one district so that they get that district, but they have less power in all the others. The second thing you do is called cracking. Packing and cracking. So cracking is when you divide up a group of people into as many districts as possible to dilute their power. So Montgomery is in 3 different congressional districts. It's split between 7, 2, and 3. And that's done to divide up the power of the people who are in Montgomery. Because if all of Montgomery was voting together, they'd definitely vote for a Democrat. So they packed some of those people into Terry Sewell's district, and then they cracked the remaining Democrat population of Montgomery into 2 separate districts, District 2 and District 3. District 2 also used to have Lowndes County. And when District 2 had Lowndes County, District 2 was far more competitive because Lowndes County is more Democratic. So in the 2010 redistricting, the Republicans moved Lowndes County out of District 2 and into District 7, so that Terry Sewell is winning by even greater margins. So when you divide up people to dilute their ability to vote for who they want, that's called cracking. When you pack them in to just one district so that they have power in that district. They get to pick whoever they want in that district, but no other district. That's called packing. Packing and cracking are the key features of gerrymandering. If you think this is fun to play with maps like this, like I do, there's this great game. Thank you, Adam Mullendorf, for introducing me to it. And it is, I think, in the comments on this event, so you can go check it out. And it like walks you through, lets you play with a map and gives you tasks. So it'll be like, you know, round one of the game is, oh yeah, okay, so let me talk about the 3 types of gerrymandering. So round one of the game is to talk about just equal distribution by numbers. So as it happens, right, you can divide a state equally into 7 parts today, and 10 years from now, they're not going to be equal anymore because population change happens, people move around. You have to, every 10 years, kind of rebalance the districts so that they're all the same population size. So that's game 1, is to just rebalance the districts so that they're all the same number of people. Then round 2, you do partisan gerrymandering. Okay, so 3 types of gerrymandering. 1 is partisan gerrymandering. This is where one party draws the line so that they win more of the votes, more of the seats, than you would otherwise see based on the total statewide percentage of voters in each party. So with a 60-40 split, it was very easy for the Republicans to win 6 out of 7 congressional seats. You can even have the minority. If we Democrats controlled the state house, I'm not saying we should do this, but we could gerrymander the seats in this state so that we win 75% of the seats, even with having only 40% of the vote. Those would be some nasty looking districts, but it could be done. So partisan gerrymandering is when you draw the lines in a way that benefits one party at the expense of the others. Second type of gerrymandering is bipartisan. Bipartisan, you say? How can gerrymandering be bipartisan? Isn't that like the dream, bipartisanship? No, it's not. So bipartisan gerrymandering is when the 2 parties get together and make a deal. And it usually, but not always, benefits the incumbents. So let's say I'm a Democratic state house rep, and I won my last election with 52% of the vote, which was great, but also like stressed me out the night of the election. I was really nervous about winning or losing. And the next district over, there's a Republican who won with 52% of the vote. That Republican and I could get together and say, the next redistricting, how about I take some Democrats from your district and gerrymander them into my district so that I win by a solid 60%. And then you take some Republicans from my district and take them into your district, and then you can win your district by 60%. It's not unfair in the sense that there's not one party that's benefiting. Both parties are benefiting. But it's bad for democracy because the voters are not having competitive elections. And the voters are entitled to competitive elections. Let's just say that again. The voters are entitled to competitive elections where they're making a real choice about who is representing them. And if we set up districts so that they're always safely one party or the other, the only choice that the voters are making is in the primary. And we all know what happens when there's primary competition. Like when the Republicans have primary competition, they all shift to the right, to the extreme members of their party who actually come out and vote in primaries. So we see people going further and further and further to the right in a Republican primary. Same thing is true in a Democratic primary. People just shuffle further and further and further to the left. We're seeing that in the presidential primaries. So that's natural to happen in primaries. Usually there's a general, in a competitive bipartisan race, there's a general election when people kind of moderate a little bit. And the representative has to be accountable to their people when they know that the election is going to be competitive. But if the election is only going to be competitive during the primary, then the only people that they are accountable to are the extreme of their own party. And that means that the rest of the voters basically don't mean anything, don't have any value to their representative. And that's a huge problem. So that's why even bipartisan gerrymandering is a problem. In a state that's split 50-50, we want to see competitive races. We don't want to see 50% of the seats being won by a big majority of Republicans and 50% being won by a big majority among the Democrats. That's not creating a healthy, functioning democracy where elected representatives are accountable to their people. Okay, so partisan is when you do it to benefit just one party. Bipartisan is when you do it to benefit both parties to make seats less competitive or to make sure that the incumbents get to keep their seats. And then racial gerrymandering. So racial gerrymandering is when people are packed into a district based on their race or color or minority status. And the Supreme Court has said that racial gerrymandering is inappropriate. And they just recently, as you might recall, ruled that partisan and bipartisan gerrymandering are not the purview of the courts. So the courts are no longer going to weigh in on, at least the federal courts are no longer going to weigh in on partisan gerrymandering. And if they're not going to stop it, then who is? It's very distressing. Okay, I'm going to time out and see what kind of questions I've gotten so far. Alrighty here. So, yeah, so Christine asks, hasn't gerrymandering become more extreme in the last 15 to 20 years? Yeah, it has. Specifically, I don't know what you want to look at. So specifically, the Republican Party, so gerrymandering has been going on for a very long time. Partisan gerrymandering has always been a thing. Always, truly. But people used to have shame about it. They used to not want to make it look like it was gerrymandering. And so there was a limit to how much they would do of it. And there was a general sense of well, if I were on the other side of it, I don't want to be totally screwed. So there's kind of a, I hate this term, but a gentleman's agreement, a mutual understanding between the parties that they wouldn't go too far in their gerrymandering because it gets gross. So for a long time, there was gerrymandering, but it wasn't extreme. And then in 1990, the Republicans stepped up their game a little bit. And then in 2010, the Republicans had a very explicit national strategy of gerrymandering across the country. So they knew that there was going to be a census in 2010. And so they made a priority of winning the state legislature in those states where the state legislature has the most control over redistricting. They didn't try to win the state legislature in every state. They picked those states where they thought if they invested enough, if they pushed hard enough, they could win the state legislature, control redistricting. And by controlling redistricting, not only were they able to control they're up to 37 state houses across the country, but also to control a inordinate amount of the congressional seats. So 2010 was the year when Democrats were caught sleeping on the job. Republicans had a nationwide strategy. They poured tons of money into state races people at the time thought it was bizarre that they were spending $1 million on some state race, some state house race, but they did it because once they controlled the state House of Representatives, the state legislature, then they controlled gerrymandering. And so they were able to take states where only maybe 40% of the population was Republican, but by working hard enough in 2010, they won control of the state legislature for that one cycle long enough to set all new congressional lines and take over 70% of congressional seats and redraw the state legislature lines so that in future elections, Republicans would be able to win 70% of the seats in that state, despite only having 40% of the population backing them. That sounds crazy, but they did it. Mad respect for the genius who came up with this and figured out how it all worked, but also like mad offense because it screwed over voters in all of these places whose voices are no longer being heard because a whole new kind of redistricting is happening now. The gerrymander now is way worse. The other really important thing to say about why that's possible, how that's done, is because of GIS mapping. So now, with all of the amazing data that's available in our digital world, they can figure out really almost house by house, but certainly block by block, precinct by precinct, what percentage of people in that block or on that precinct vote Democrat and Republican. And so they can draw the lines so carefully to ensure that they get a district that has exactly the outcome that they're aiming for. And that really takes the power away from the people. We're not deciding our candidates. Our candidates are deciding which of us get to choose them. It's pretty messed up. Okay, other questions? Let's see. Well, that's creepy. Hi, y'all. It's good to see you. Checking in. I would love that. Okay, how would they pack the district? Great question, Robert. So Robert wants to know, how would they pack the district if we lose a seat after the census? Wouldn't that at least ensure one safe blue and one toss-up? So, right. So they, the good news is, okay, the bad news is we're losing a seat. Probably losing a seat in Congress with the 2020 census. But the good news is that it can't get any worse in Alabama. With 40% of the vote, we're bound to have at least one Democrat in our congressional delegation. We should have two, right? Even if we're down to 6 seats, we should have 2 of those. My guess is they're not going to give us 2. They're going to try and continue to keep it at just the one, just Terry Sewell's seat. And I'm guessing they will protect Terry and they won't try to like gerrymander her out of her own seat, which is another dicey move I didn't talk about earlier, but can be done. So I think that they will probably try to figure out a way to make sure that no district becomes competitive. Right now, the most competitive, potentially competitive districts are 2 and 3 because of the diversity in those districts. For example, so hold on, let me grab my notes. Okay, let me make sure I say it right. So District 7, Terry Sewell's district, is 63.4% African American, which is way more than is needed to create a majority minority district. So if you made that district 50% African American, it would still definitely go to the Dem, but you wouldn't be overkill. And you moved the remaining 14% of that district that is African American, if you moved them into District 2, which is already 31.6% African American. District 2 would become 45.6% African American and would also go Democrat. So they're not going to do that because they're going to try real hard to not give us another seat. So I imagine, I think actually they might, Terry Sewell's district is small, and it'll need to be made bigger. When we lose a seat, each of the other seats will get a little larger, bigger population. So I think they may even try and pack more of the African American community into Congressional District 7. Boo. But since the Supreme Court has said that they're not going to intervene, and so far we've been unable to convince a judge that the 63% African American population in District 7 is a racial gerrymander, which I think it clearly is. I don't know if we can win any further battles, but I'm sure what they'll do is they'll crack the Democratic vote and make sure that no, they might divide us up more so that Bradley Byrne isn't winning by quite such a big margin, and Mo Brooks isn't winning by quite such a big margin. But they're not going to give us another seat unless we fight for it. We'll get to that. So let's also talk a little bit about, so racial gerrymandering, right, is allowed. Racial gerrymandering is a problem, but there is an instance in which racial gerrymandering is allowed. So there is the Voting Rights Act of 1965, right? So the Voting Rights Act of 1965 said, y'all, do you hear that? There's an ice cream truck going by my house. It's kind of fun. So the Voting Rights Act of 1965, Section 2, says that it is appropriate, here, let me get the wording right. It just says that states may create majority-minority districts in order to ensure that that minority voters have an opportunity to pick a representative who represents them, who is their preference. So one of the, the Voting Rights Act, right, was intended to like address some of the racism inherent in our voting system and in the way that elections were being done in the U.S. So not since Reconstruction, right, have there been like any kind of significant representation of African Americans in Congress. And in 1990 and then again in 2010, the Republicans had a brilliant idea. They knew that the Voting Rights Act was intended to protect African Americans from voter suppression, and that the Voting Rights Act specifically said that it is okay to pack minorities into a district if the point of doing so is to ensure that the minority group is able to pick a representative of their own choosing. So it is acceptable under the Voting Rights Act to put a lot of African American voters into a single district so that they can pick the representative they want, almost always a Democrat. The Republicans, when they wanted to gain power, came up with a brilliant deal. They said, they went to Black Democrats, to the Congressional Black Caucus, and said, we'd like to make a deal. We're going to gerrymander the states so that, the congressional districts in these states, so that you get a Black congressperson, and in exchange, we Republicans get some other seats. And the Congressional Black Caucus agreed to this deal, and they got, here's the good news, the number of African American congressional representatives like doubled because of that gerrymander, which was huge. We needed to increase the number of African Americans in Congress. Super important, not at all diminishing that. That is so critical. The unforeseen consequence, or the unintended consequence, or the side effect, nasty side effect of this was that Republicans took control of more and more seats. So Terry Sewell's district is a great example of that, where that district was kind of allowed because it is a way for African Americans to select someone of their choosing and have a Black representative in Congress. Yay. The side effect was that Republicans got all of the other 6 districts in the state. So this is a fascinating part of the Voting Rights Act that I think we have to continue to push on and try and figure out, how do we continue to ensure that minorities are able to get representation in Congress, and also make sure that it isn't being done at the expense of Democrats getting elected. So right now in this country, like in 2016, I believe it was 2016 and 2014, Democrats won more votes for Congress than Republicans did. And Republicans won way more seats. You would think that across the country, if Democrats are winning more votes, that they would win more seats. But because of gerrymandering, that's no longer true. Again, I'm not against the Voting Rights Act of 1965. This is super important. But it is an unintended consequence, and I think we need some like really smart people to figure out, how do we ensure minority representation without it being, therefore meaning that the Republicans get to control way more of Congress and of state houses than they should be. That's a deal with the devil that we never meant to make, and we need to figure out a solution. So those districts are called majority minority districts. So there's our districts where the minority is the majority, at least 50% of the population. A majority minority district is defined by having one minority that is at least 50% of the population. In Terry Sewell's district, again, not to harp on the point, but African Americans make up 63% of the district. They would have met majority minority status with 50%, but Republicans went ahead and packed 63% in that district so that they could have fewer Black folks in the districts that they wanted for Republicans. Here, see the ice cream truck? I don't know if y'all can hear it, but it's kind of fun. Okay, so that was a very long answer, Robert Hunter, to your question, but important to cover. Yeah. Hey, Demarius. Hey, Susan. All right. What kind of effect does straight ticket have? Great question, Lloyd. So I think the effect of straight ticket is that, so our districts, right, are already, it already basically doesn't matter. Your vote here in Alabama, in a gerrymandered state, your vote, I'm sorry to say, doesn't matter unless you're a primary voter in the party that is already predestined to win that seat. Now, I ran for Congress anyway. So I think it's incredibly important that we run anyway, despite the fact that the whole system is rigged to ensure we lose. We have to keep running because we fall deeper and deeper into that hole and we don't. But the effect of straight ticket voting is that we have more and more voters who don't pay attention at all to politics, because all they have to do is show up once a year, check that one straight ticket box, and everything falls into place. And what that means is that it gives even more power to primary voters, and they choose the even more extreme, sometimes outrageous candidates. And I should say, to be fair, Democrats did this too. Like here in Alabama, this state was overwhelmingly Democrat, and the Democratic Party was encouraging people to not pay attention. And that's, you know, the Democratic Party is why of old is why we have straight ticket voting. So I don't mean to say that this is all, I'm not putting all of it on the Republicans' feet, but that gerrymander of 2010, their effort to win state houses in 2010 in order to control redistricting in 2011, 2012 was epic, genius, and evil. And that's why we are where we are today. All right, let's see what else. Tavish asks, since it's not the purview of the courts, what do you think is the best way to eliminate the practice of gerrymandering? Great question. Okay, so there's a couple options that we have for ending gerrymandering. And there are some states that we can look to for ideas on this. So, oh, that's just like so full. I don't know. All right, I'm gonna move around anyway because it's fun. All right, so oh, that's not gonna want to erase. So the state that does this best is Iowa. I'm not gonna be able to erase that right now. Okay, never mind. Here we go. So the state that does this best is Iowa. They have a nonpartisan redistricting commission that is truly nonpartisan, and both parties respect the decisions that the commission makes. And sometimes the commission unseats an incumbent by drawing the line in a way that the incumbent no longer lives in that district. And rather than have lawsuits, generally speaking, people accept the decisions of that nonpartisan redistricting commission. So what makes for a truly nonpartisan redistricting commission is that that commission is not allowed to use partisan data to determine where the lines are drawn. So they don't even look at that information. They really try and make the districts make sense. Keep communities together that make sense together. So, they try not to divide cities in half. They try not to divide regions that identify as a single region. So like the Wiregrass thinks of itself as a single region. You'd hate to see it broken up. So they take care of those kinds of things, and then they do their best to make them evenly sized based on population, try and keep them along existing county lines and municipal lines. It's all done in a very nonpartisan way. And yeah, you do sometimes end up with districts that are overwhelmingly Republican or overwhelmingly Democrat, but you also end up with competitive districts, as it should be, right? But at least they're representing a real sensible constituency of people. Here's the problem, though, with nonpartisan redistricting committees. Okay, so I said the first thing you have to do is have like partisan neutral criteria for how you make the decisions about where to draw the lines. But the second thing you need is a nonpartisan commission. You need members, people to make up the commission who are not partisan. Someone's got to draw these maps, and that person is going to know something about where Democrats live and where Republicans live. And if they're not truly nonpartisan in their actions, they're gonna play favorites. So a lot of states like Arizona have a nonpartisan commission where they do 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans, and an independent chair of the commission, make up a 5-member commission there. And the problem is, and so that commission is supposed to come to an agreement about the lines. So the 2 Republicans are put on the committee by the Republican Party of Arizona, and the 2 Democrats are put on the committee by the Democratic Party of Arizona. And so they're very partisan. So 4 of the 5 members are very partisan. And then the chair, who's supposed to be this neutral, independent person, how do you find that person? And how do you ensure they're neutral? So they did this whole process in Arizona of trying to like vet people and make sure that these people were actually neutral and nonpartisan. And you know what happened? Both parties tried to get people in place who were secretly partisan. Not surprising. I mean, politics can be dirty. Not surprisingly, they tried to stack the deck for their own benefit. Both parties tried to do it. So the neutral, nonpartisan Redistricting Commission was anything but neutral. And a lot of states have struggled with that. They have tried to create nonpartisan commissions, but inherently those commissions are located in partisan states and are made up of partisan people. So that's really hard. The other thing that you can try to do is you can try and just tell the state legislature who's in charge of making these maps, just tell them that they are not allowed to favor one party over the other. And then at least that brings back the shame factor. Like, they're probably going to at least try and hide it a little bit better when they do partisan redistricting. Hard to say whether that would work. Another option is alternative voting systems. So, you know, in lots of other places around the world, rather than doing what we do and breaking the state into 7 regions, 7 bits, 7 districts, and electing just one person in each of those districts, they would have an election for the state as a whole, and the top 7 vote winners would get seated. Now that may seem like too many and too big of a region to be running for election in, but you could do smaller regions. You could say that all of South Alabama is going to have an election, and the top 2 vote getters are going to go to Congress. And then you'd be much more likely to get 1 Republican and 1 Democrat. But that really, like, that is big change that will freak people out. So I don't know how realistic that is. Another option is to do, that's called multi-member districts. That's the term people use for that. Another option is to have at-large districts. So you could have, you know, some of them divided up regionally, but others that are elected more at large, and that would give more opportunity for other folks to get elected. You could do proportional voting, like lots of European countries do. Another option is more seats in Congress. So a lot of people say we just need to have more people in Congress. 1 congressperson for 700,000 voters means there's no way on earth that they are like with the people, like down on the ground level, chatting with people on the daily. Like, there's just no way. That's too many people to keep up with, and too many people to try and represent all of their interests. So maybe we should have smaller districts where you represent fewer people and you can be more focused on the needs of that particular group. Not that there couldn't still be some partisan gerrymandering, but the smaller the break, you know, the sections are, the more likely people would be getting their needs met. My phone is ringing. Oh no. I'm gonna close my door. All right. So the other thing to do about gerrymandering is to call it out when we see it, and to try and win. Ideally, we need to win. We need to control the legislature in a census year if we want to control the next round of redistricting. That is not going to happen in Alabama in 2020. There's no way. We've already had the 2018 elections were the ones that determined who's in the state house for the 2021 redistricting, and Democrats did not do well. So we're not going to control the state. They're going to draw the lines, but we can mount a legal opposition. And one great way to do that is to propose alternative maps. So the Republicans are going to draw maps, and they're going to say, like, this is as good as it gets. I guess there are some districts that look lopsided or funny shaped, but like no one could do better. Back in, what, 2015, and then continuing through 2017, there was a challenge in Alabama of the legislative districts, the way they were drawn. And one of the things that the Republican Party continuously argued was that if the Democrats had a problem with this, they should have proposed an alternative map. Let me tell you, we will propose an alternative map, and we will show that they don't have to do it the crazy pants way that they're doing it. There is a way to do it that is far more fair to the voters of this state. And by showing an alternative map, then a court can look at it and say, there is a way to create a majority-minority district that doesn't dilute the power of the Black vote in Alabama. Democrats showed us exactly what that looks like, and so Republicans no longer get to claim that they did the best they could. So I think it's super important that we do that, and challenging in court is getting harder because the Supreme Court said they can't do anything about partisan gerrymandering, but it's still the only option we have. So what we could try and do eventually is try and get something on the ballot, a ballot amendment, a constitutional amendment here in Alabama that would say that districts need to be drawn in a nonpartisan way. And if we put that in our state constitution, then we can appeal to state courts to redraw the maps when they're unjust. The good news is, if we could get it on the ballot, it would probably pass. Even really partisan people across both sides of the aisle will vote for that, because everybody gets it, that voting should be fair, and that a vote in my district should be meaningful, just like a vote in your district is meaningful. And it's not playing out that way because of gerrymandering. We can all feel it in our souls, and we can feel how the political conversation is getting more and more extreme because of this gerrymandering. Whether or not we realize that's why it's happening, that's why it's happening. We're getting more divided as a country, more divided in our local places, because gerrymandering forces politicians to take extreme positions in order to win in the primary. It's really screwing with our whole society, and we've got to push back against that. And if we had something in place in state law, then we would have a better chance of challenging it in court. But you can still challenge maps in court based on racial gerrymandering. The Supreme Court has not said that they oppose that. And there is a lawsuit coming out of Alabama right now about racial gerrymandering. So keep an eye on that. Alrighty. Hey, Holden. Let's see. Do I support going for full proportional representation, or do I support keeping communities of interest together? Oh gosh, like me personally, see, I get like a little professorial, and then I have to think about my personal opinion. Yeah, I think it'd be great to at least try real proportional representation. And I don't think that means not keeping communities of interest together. I think it means that a community of interest can work together to make sure that their preferred candidate is one of the top vote getters, and thereby they get representation. So I don't think we have to choose between proportional representation and keeping communities of interest together. I think that's a false choice that we've been given, and we should fight back against it. But man, it's going to be a hard lift to get proportional representation here in the US, where people are really stuck in their ways about our first past the post model of voting. Robert also says, looking to depress voter turnout. Yeah, I mean, why bother voting when you know that there's only one candidate on the ballot? Like, turnout in Congressional District 7 is lower than it would otherwise be because Terry Sewell has no challenger. And in fact, that district is so black that almost all of the seats, lots and lots of seats in that district are decided during the primary, not during the general. There's not even Republicans on the ballot for many general election races. So voters in District 7 don't come out to vote in the general election. And that means less votes for Walt Maddox, and for Heather Milam, and for Joe Siegelman, and for Donna Smalley, and for Bob Vance. They got less votes from that district than they would have if that district were competitive in other races. And so it's another way in which people's votes don't matter, and it suppresses the African-American vote by making fewer important elections on the ballot. It is like a vicious, vicious cycle where things just get worse and worse. All right. Demarius asks, let's say that one or a few Democrats switch over to the Republican side. How much of that piece of the pie here in Alabama would change? If some Democrats switched over to the Republican side, ran as Republicans. Yeah, I don't really believe in running as a Republican personally. Now, there are some times when I think it's fine. If you want to run for coroner as a Republican because it's dumb that coroner is a partisan position, like no judgment. But I think we need to be, like, a top priority needs to be intellectual honesty about what we stand for, what we're going to do. If we don't have our integrity, what do we have? So I think we have to stick with being honest about who we are and what we stand for. Yes, the Democratic brand is damaged in Alabama, but I would much rather devote time and energy to fixing that brand rather than telling people to, like, put on a mask and pretend to be a Republican. Don't do that. Do not put on a mask and pretend to be a Republican, in my opinion. Keep your integrity. Be clear about who you are. Run as an independent if you want. Good luck. It's terribly hard to do here in Alabama, but be honest about who you are and what you believe in. Keep it to the position you're running for. Again, if you're running for coroner, like, when you're dead, you're not blue or red, you're just dead. And what makes a good coroner has nothing to do with party affiliation. But in most races, it does matter. And there are values that you need to be upfront about. So just my opinion, Demarius. Don't run as a Republican. All right. Would ranked choice voting help the situation? Yes, Robert Hunter, it would. That is one of the alternative voting systems that I was talking about. And one way to do ranked choice voting, for those who aren't familiar with it, is the way that, so California has done this with ranked choice voting in the primary. So rather than having a Democratic primary and a Republican primary, there's just a primary, and the top two vote getters are in the general election. So if it's a super, super blue district, the top two vote getters are going to be two Democrats, and they're going to be going against each other in the general election, rather than always having a Republican in the election, even though the district is overwhelmingly Democrat. So the upside of that is that the general election is still where the excitement happens, so it helps get out the vote for the other important things that are being decided in a general, and makes gerrymandering a little less painful, makes safe districts, whether they're Democrat or Republican, makes them a little less painful and a little less likely to result in extreme positions being held. Maybe you could still end up with a result of kind of an extreme candidate. But yes, love ranked choice voting. When I lived in Minnesota, we had a mayoral race that was done by ranked choice voting, which I'll tell you what, Montgomery could really use some ranked choice voting in the upcoming mayoral election, because it is like the presidential primary down here. We've got like too many people, 15 people or something running for mayor of Montgomery. It's a mess. And you know what we're going to end up with? So it's a nonpartisan race, but we're going to end up with, there are like 8 black men running and 1 white guy or whatever it is. The white guy's going to end up in the runoff, even though that's not necessarily how it should be. In ranked choice voting, we would probably end up with 2 black men in the general election. But because of the way that we do it, we're going to probably end up with this white guy, David Woods, who owns the local Fox station. Not all white people are bad, but this guy owns the local Fox station. He's not what we want for many reasons. But I will stay out of the mayoral election for now. Okay, anyway. All right, Tavish asks, if we need to win, how do we get more people to actually run? And how do we make it easier for someone to run for office? You elect me as your state party chair, and I will make it easier for people to run to office. I will support the heck out of you if you choose to run for office, because it is a bold, sacrificial decision, and you deserve to have lots and lots of support in doing that. And your party is responsible for supporting you as you make a run for office. And I will do that and make sure that all of the many Democrats out there who want to help their candidates are given support to do so. So that's an easy one. Easy, Tavish. Just select me as party chair. All right, let's see. Becky. Hey, Becky Boone. So glad that you're here. Yes, I totally want I want us to have a working democracy where both parties are able to have a real conversation. Amen and hallelujah. Would elections be easier or more straightforward if they were nonpartisan? Good, deep question. Yes and no. You know, there are a lot of elections, and if you have to really find out somebody's official position on every single issue, it's really hard. One thing that parties do that maybe isn't as appreciated is that parties hold people accountable. So if you run saying that you're in favor of criminal justice reform and you're in favor of social safety net programs and you're in favor of early childhood education, kinds of things you might find on a Democratic platform, and then you don't vote for those things, your party can hold you accountable and be like, no, you're not a Democrat, get out of here. If it weren't for parties doing that, holding candidates accountable, holding politicians accountable, we might end up with people who promise to be everything to everyone and don't keep their promises. So I think that's one of the reasons that the parties are helpful, is that accountability piece. And it's a little bit of it's just a heuristic device for remembering, like, in general, I support the kind of approach that says we should help people survive, because more people who, giving someone a boost to make sure they succeed in society is well worth the price. And rather than, the other side saying, in general, their philosophy is, individual responsibility. If you can't make it here, sink or swim, buddy. And letting people fail, even though that's going to cost us as a society more to deal with their failure or their economic crisis than it would to just help somebody out. So I think it is a helpful heuristic to be able to assign people to parties. But it's imperfect, absolutely imperfect. I have certainly voted for a Democrat before and then later realized that they weren't exactly who I thought they were going to be. And that's because sometimes we lean too hard on that heuristic and think that every Democrat is who we're hoping they're going to be. And that's not always the case. So definitely get to know your candidates, but that heuristic is a nice way to get started on the process. All right, it is 8:02. I'm 2 minutes after my scheduled end time. So there's so much more that I could talk about. I was going to talk about some other Supreme Court cases and whatnot, but it's just a whole lot of information to cover, and my whiteboard is not erasing, so life is hard. Life is hard. Also, our democracy is being threatened by gerrymandering, also making life hard. Thank you all for being here, and I'll talk to you again soon. Bye.